Oh, hello there, my dear. Come in, don't be shy. I've just brewed a fresh pot of Earl Grey, 2 sugars for me, just as it's always been. You know, it's funny the things that can send your mind wandering back through the years. Just now, I was stirring my tea and caught a glimpse of myself in the back of this old spoon. Goodness, these hands, they look like road maps, don't they? Every line, every wrinkle, a story of a path taken. And seeing them just now, it brought a memory to the front of my mind as clear as this very teacup. It was a memory of a choice I made back in 1955. I was standing at a crossroads. You see, a place where I had to choose between the life everyone expected of me and a tiny, nagging voice inside my own heart. That single choice, dear, it felt like it would either be my salvation or my complete ruin. It all started with a single, perfect, red rose. I was just dusting my bookshelf this morning, the sun streaming in through that window there, making all the little dust motes dance like fairies. One of my old poetry books slipped from my fingers, and as it fell, something fluttered out from between the pages. It was a rose, pressed flat as a pancake, of course, and the color of old wine now, but I knew it instantly. I picked it up, and the papery feel of it took me right back. The smell wasn't there anymore, but oh, I can remember it like it was yesterday. The scent of sweet petals mixed with the smell of rain on a hot, dusty road. Back then, our little English village felt like the biggest place in the world. The war was a memory we were all trying to leave behind, and there was a feeling in the air, a sort of hopeful hum. Rationing was ending, new houses were being built, and for us young ones, it felt like the world was finally opening up, full of promise. The highlight of our summer was always the annual village fete. It was a day of pure magic. The sound of the steam-powered carousel, the shouts of the men in the tug-of-war competition, the sweet, sticky taste of homemade lemonade that Mrs. Higgins made in a giant ceramic jug. My best friend, Clara, and I, we lived for the fete. We'd save our pennies for weeks to have a go at the coconut shy and share a bag of hot, sugary donuts. That year, 1955, felt different. We were 17, you see. No longer children, but not quite women. We were on the cusp of everything. I remember we wore matching dresses our mothers had sewn. Mine was a pale blue, hers a soft yellow. We felt so grown up. And that's when he appeared. His name was Arthur. He was new to the area, staying with his aunt while his parents were supposedly abroad. He was, for lack of a better word, like someone from a film. He had this easy smile that made your stomach do a little flip, and dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead. He was charming. Oh, impossibly charming. He spoke with a confidence none of the local boys had, and he seemed to know just what to say to make you feel like you were the only person in the whole noisy fairground. He approached us at the cake stand, where I was trying to decide between a Victoria sponge and a Battenberg. A difficult choice, he said, his voice smooth and deep. A girl with such bright eyes deserves the prettiest cake. I felt my cheeks flush crimson. Clara, who was usually the more talkative one, just stood there, watching him with a quiet, unreadable expression. Arthur spent the rest of the afternoon with us. He paid for our lemonade. He won me a little stuffed bear at the ring toss of feet. No one had managed all day on. He listened, truly listened, as I talked about my silly dreams of one day seeing the ocean. He made me feel special. He made me feel seen. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the trampled grass, he walked me towards the lane that led to my house. The air was cooling, and you could hear the evening birds starting their songs. He stopped by the vicar's garden wall, where the most beautiful roses were climbing. With a quick, sly glance around, he plucked the most perfect one, a deep, velvety red that was just beginning to open. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing against mine. "For you, Eleanor," he said, his eyes holding mine. "A perfect rose for a perfect day." My heart felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. It was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. I was utterly captivated, but as he smiled and bid me good night, I glanced back over my shoulder. Clara was waiting for me at the end of the lane, just as we'd arranged, but she wasn't smiling. She was standing there, hugging her arms to her chest, and the look on her face wasn't one of excitement for her friend. It was a look of deep, unsettling worry. And in that moment, seeing her expression, I felt the first tiny, cold prickle of doubt, sharp as a thorn on the stem of the rose I was holding. I didn't know it then, but that rose was the beginning of everything. The weeks that followed the fate were a blur, a whirlwind of sweet, stolen moments. Arthur courted me in the proper, old-fashioned way, but with a flair that felt thrillingly modern. There were no more chance meetings at the cake stand. Instead, he would just appear as I walked home from my Saturday job at the draper's shop, or he'd be waiting with 2 tickets for the pictures, his smile as dazzling as the film stars on the screen. We'd take long walks along the canal, and he would tell me stories of the places he'd supposedly traveled with his parents. He spoke of bustling markets in Morocco and quiet, snowy streets in Switzerland. To a girl who'd never been further than the next county, it was intoxicating. He had this way of making everything feel like a grand secret, just between the two of us. "Don't tell your parents I spent my last shilling on this box of chocolates for you," he'd whisper with a wink. "Let's just let this be our adventure." And I, foolishly, loved it. I loved the feeling of being part of his exciting world, a world that seemed so much more colorful than my own. He painted a future for us, a beautiful tapestry of travel and love and a life less ordinary. I believed every single word. I clung to them. But as my feelings for Arthur grew, so did the distance between me and Clara. She was my other half. You know, we'd shared every secret since we were 5 years old, from scraped knees to our first clumsy attempts at putting on lipstick. Now, when I'd talk about Arthur, a shudder would come down over her face. She'd get quiet, her answers short. She stopped asking about him. One afternoon, we were sitting on our favorite bench overlooking the duck pond, a place where we had solved all the world's problems 100 times over. I was telling her about how Arthur had promised to take me to Paris one day, to see the Eiffel Tower. I was floating on air. "Elle," she said, interrupting me. Her voice was flat. "Don't you think it's all a bit much?" "What do you mean?" I asked, my happiness deflating a little. "It's just, ... It's all so fast," she said, choosing her words carefully. "He's so smooth, so perfect. Doesn't it feel a bit like he's playing a part in a play?" "That's a horrible thing to say, Clara," I retorted, feeling defensive. "You're just jealous." The moment I said it, I wanted to take it back. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. The hurt in her eyes was plain to see. "Jealous? Of what?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Elle, I'm your best friend. I just, ... I hear things, whispers from the next town over, where his aunt used to live. Rumors about him." "What rumors?" I demanded, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Just, ... talk," she said, looking down at her hands. "About a family that lost everything, and his name was mentioned. It's probably just gossip, but..." I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. "It is just gossip. It's cruel gossip, and you're cruel for repeating it. You're trying to ruin this for me." I didn't let her finish. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting alone on the bench. The rift between us had become a canyon. A few days later, Arthur took me to Miller's Bridge, a lovely old stone bridge that arched over the river. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He took both my hands in his expression serious and tender. He told me he loved me more than he had words to say. He told me he wanted to spend every day of his life making me happy. And then, he got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. He presented a small, simple ring with a tiny sapphire. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I cried. Of course, I said yes without a moment's hesitation. This was it. This was the beginning of my real life, the life I was meant to have. I felt ecstatic, a pure, bubbling joy that washed away all the recent unpleasantness. I ran all the way to Clara's house, my feet barely touching the ground. I had to tell her. I thought that surely, this news, this wonderful, concrete proof of Arthur's love and commitment, would make her see how wrong she had been. I imagined her squealing with delight, hugging me, the chasm between us closing, as we planned my wedding together. I found her in her back garden, tending to the roses. I held out my hand, the sapphire sparkling in the fading light. He asked me, "Clara, we're getting married." She looked at my hand, she looked at my beaming face, but the delight I was expecting never came. Her face went pale. She didn't squeal, she didn't hug me. She just stood there in a stark, fearful silence that seemed to suck all the joy out of the air. Then she looked me straight in the eye, her own eyes filled with a desperate plea, and said, "You can't, Elle, you just can't." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "What do you mean, I can't?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. This is the happiest day of my life, Clara. Can't you just be happy for me? This isn't about being happy for you, Elle. This is about protecting you, she said, stepping closer and lowering her voice, as if the rose bushes might have ears. Please, just listen to me for 1 minute. Properly listen. I crossed my arms, my joy curdling into resentment. I'm listening. My cousin, you know, Mary, who lives in Oak. I wrote to her. I asked her about Arthur. It wasn't just gossip. Clara's hands were twisting the fabric of her apron, a nervous habit she'd had since we were little. There was a girl there. Her name was Isabel. Her father was a baker, saved up his whole life to buy a bigger shop. She was engaged to a young man who had just moved to town. A charming man. He convinced her father that he could invest his savings for him. Doubled the money in 6 months. The man disappeared 2 days before the wedding. So did the baker's entire life savings. And you think that was Arthur? I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. Just because some man in another town was a rogue? That's ridiculous. The man's name wasn't Arthur, Clara admitted, and for a second, I felt a wave of triumphant relief. It was Anthony. But Mary said the description. It's him. The same stories about traveling, the same way of talking. She said he even gave Isabel a little stuffed bear he won at their summer fair. The blood drained from my face. My little stuffed bear, the one from the ring toss, was sitting on my dressing table at home, but I couldn't let the doubt in. To believe her would mean my entire world was a lie. It was easier to believe my best friend was a bitter, jealous storyteller. You're lying, I whispered, the accusation tasting foul on my tongue. You're making this up because you can't stand to see me happy. You've always been in my shadow, haven't you? And now that I have something wonderful, something that's just for me, you have to try and tear it down. The slap of her hand across my face was so unexpected it stunned me into silence. We had never, ever laid a hand on each other. Her eyes were blazing with tears. Don't you dare, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage and sorrow. Don't you dare say that to me. I love you, you idiot. That's all this has ever been about. She turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind her, and that was it. Our friendship, a thing that had felt as strong and enduring as the old oaks on the village green, was shattered. Oh. This part is still so clear in my mind, the ache of it. By the way, dear, where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not just talking to my teacup. Knowing someone is listening, well, it makes these old memories easier to hold. I went home and cried, not for my broken friendship, but for what I told myself was Clara's betrayal. When Arthur came to see me that evening, I fell into his arms and told him everything. He held me, stroking my hair, his expression one of perfect sympathy and righteous anger. Oh, my love, he said, his voice a soothing balm on my wounded heart. I am so sorry you had to endure that. There was a misunderstanding in Oakhaven, a business dealing with a man that went sour. He was a rival for Isabel's affections, and when she chose me, he spread vicious lies to ruin my name. It broke my heart. That's why I had to leave. I couldn't bear the whispers. He looked at me, his eyes shining with sincerity. I should have told you. I was just so ashamed, and I wanted to leave all that ugliness in the past. Can you forgive me for not being honest sooner? His explanation was so smooth, so plausible. It filled in all the gaps and painted him as the victim. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. I chose to believe him. I chose his story over my friend's warning. We set a date for the wedding. My parents, thrilled at the match, began planning with gusto. My mother started sewing my wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory, satin, and lace. I buried Clara's words deep down, like a stone in the pit of my stomach, and threw myself into the joyful preparations. Life became a whirl of choosing flowers, addressing invitations, and dreaming of the future. Arthur was the perfect fiancé, attentive, loving, doting. He charmed my parents and won over all my relatives. I told myself I was the luckiest girl alive. But sometimes, in the dead of night, Clara's words would surface, cold and sharp. The story of the baker's daughter. His name was Anthony. Then, just a few days before the wedding, the stone in my stomach turned to ice. Arthur had left his overcoat draped on a chair. I went to hang it up for him, and as I picked it up, something heavy in the inside pocket slid against the fabric. Curiosity got the better of me. I reached inside and pulled out a small, handsome book bound in dark green leather. It was a ledger of some kind, with a small, brass lock keeping it shut. When he came back into the room, I was holding it. "What's this, my love?" I asked, trying to sound casual, playful even. He didn't smile. For the first time since I'd met him, his charming mask slipped. His eyes went cold and hard, just for a second. He snatched the book from my hand so quickly, it made me flinch. "It's nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Just some old business accounts. Of no importance." He forced a smile then, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, have you decided on the ribbon color for the bouquets?" He changed the subject, but I couldn't shake the image of his face in that split second. The coldness, the flicker of something that looked an awful lot like fear. He tucked the ledger back into his coat, but this time, he didn't leave the coat behind. And for the first time, a genuine, terrifying shiver of fear went down my spine. The tiny, nagging voice I had silenced for so long began to whisper again, and this time, it was impossible to ignore. That night, sleep was a stranger. I tossed and turned. The feel of the cool, smooth leather of that locked ledger burned into my memory. Arthur's face, for that one unguarded second, played over and over in my mind. The charm was gone, replaced by a chilling hardness I'd never seen before. His excuse of old business accounts felt thin, flimsy. Why would unimportant old accounts need a lock? The whispers of doubt I had so forcefully suppressed were now screaming. Clara's cousin, the baker's daughter. His name was Anthony. The little stuffed bear on my dresser suddenly seemed to mock me. Around 2 in the morning, when the house was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, I crept out of bed. Arthur was staying in our guest room, a common courtesy in those days, before a wedding. I knew where his coat was, hung neatly on the back of the door. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt like a criminal in my own home, but I had to know. I tiptoed down the hallway, the floorboards groaning softly beneath my bare feet. I eased open the guest room door. Arthur was fast asleep, a soft whistle escaping his lips. He looked so innocent, so harmless. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I about to destroy everything over a paranoid fantasy? But the image of his cold eyes spurred me on. The coat was there. I carefully, slowly, reached into the inner pocket. My fingers closed around the ledger. I retreated back to my room, closing the door without a sound, my whole body trembling. Now for the lock. It was small, but it looked sturdy. I remembered my father had a little box of tools he used for repairing clocks, full of tiny, delicate instruments. I found it in his study, and with a hairpin from my dressing table and a tiny screwdriver, I began to work on the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping the pin. It felt like an eternity, hunched over in the sliver of moonlight coming through my window. Finally, with a faint click, the lock sprang open. I took a deep, shuddering breath and opened the book. It wasn't filled with love poems or sketches of our future home. It was page after page of neat, meticulous handwriting. It was a list of women's names. Isabel, Oakhaven, pound 500. My breath caught in my throat. There it was. Clara had been right. It was all true. I felt a wave of nausea, so powerful I had to put my head between my knees. Shame washed over me, hot and sickening. Shame for how I had treated Clara, for my willful blindness, for being so completely and utterly fooled. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the neat columns. Margaret, Littlehempton, pound 350, a brooch. Sarah, Eastwick, £600, her mother's inheritance. Each name was a ghost, a story of betrayal just like the one that was about to be mine. And next to some names, there was another name written in pencil. Anthony, Arthur, Andrew. He changed his name for each new town, each new victim. The man I was going to marry, the man I had professed to love, was a predator. A thief who didn't just steal money, but stole hearts, hopes, and futures. The love story I had staked my entire life on was nothing but a carefully constructed lie, a role he had played before and clearly intended to play again. My first instinct was to run, to scream, to wake my parents and expose him for the monster he was. But then what? It would be my word, a hysterical bride-to-be, against this charming, well-liked man. The scandal would be enormous. It wouldn't just ruin him. It would ruin me, my family. In a small village in 1955, a jilted woman was a tragic figure, but a woman who caused such a scandal was a pariah. No, I couldn't be hysterical. I had to be clever. My fear began to cool, hardening into a cold, clear resolve. He had underestimated me. He thought I was just another naive girl he could dazzle and discard. He was wrong. I went back to my father's study and found a clean sheet of paper, with a steady hand I didn't know I possessed. I spent the next hour copying every single name, every town, every amount, every alias from his ledger onto my own sheet of paper. When I was done, I carefully re-locked the little book using the hairpin and screwdriver, my hands moving with a new, grim purpose. I crept back to the guest room and slipped the ledger back into his coat pocket, exactly as I had found it. He never stirred. I returned to my room and folded the paper, the damning list, into a small, neat square. The sun was just beginning to hint at the horizon, a pale gray light filtering into my room. It was my wedding day. My beautiful ivory dress was hanging on the wardrobe, a symbol of a future that was now a complete lie. In a few hours, the church bells would be ringing for me. My friends and family would be waiting, and Arthur, the charming, handsome groom, would be waiting at the altar. I sat on my bed, the piece of paper hidden in the palm of my hand. My heart was no longer pounding with fear, but with a slow, heavy, determined beat. The question was no longer if I could escape this, but how. How do you stop a wedding when you're the bride? The morning passed in a surreal haze. My mother fluttered around me, a happy, clucking hen, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Oh, Eleanor, you look beautiful. The most beautiful bride this village has ever seen," she said, her eyes misty with tears as she fastened the last of the pearl buttons on my dress. I looked at my reflection in the long mirror. The girl staring back looked like a bride. She was wearing the dress, the veil, but her eyes were not the eyes of a happy woman. They were the eyes of a soldier going into battle. My father gave me a small, white prayer book to carry. It was his mother's. As I took it, I slipped the folded piece of paper, my secret weapon, between its pages. Then, my mother handed me my bouquet, a cascade of white roses and baby's breath. The scent of the roses was cloying, almost sickening. It reminded me of the first rose Arthur had given me, the one that had started this whole charade. The walk to the church was the longest of my life. Villagers lined the path, smiling and waving. I felt like a complete imposter. I was walking towards a lie, and they were all celebrating it. When my father and I reached the heavy oak doors of the church, he squeezed my arm. "Ready, my girl," he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The organ music swelled as the doors opened. The church was full, a sea of familiar faces, all turned towards me. They were all beaming. My parents, my aunts and uncles, our neighbors. And there, at the altar, stood Arthur. He was watching me, his face alight with that handsome, confident smile. He looked every inch the perfect, adoring groom. The sight of him made my stomach clench with a cold fury. As I began the slow walk down the aisle on my father's arm, I scanned the pews. My eyes searched for the one face I needed to see. And then I found her. Standing at the very back of the church, half hidden by a stone pillar, was Clara. She wasn't dressed in her bridesmaid's finery. She was in a simple day dress. She must have slipped in after everyone else was seated. She wasn't looking at me with triumph or an "I told you so" smirk. Her face was just etched with pure, agonizing worry for me. Our eyes met across the length of the church, and in that one look, 1,000 apologies and a universe of understanding passed between us. It was the strength I needed. I reached the altar. My father placed my hand in Arthur's. His hand was warm and steady. Mine was ice cold. The vicar began the service, his voice echoing in the hallowed silence. I stood there, my mind clear and sharp, waiting for my moment. Then, it came. The vicar looked from Arthur to me and then out at the congregation. "I require and charge you both, as ye will answer at the dreadful day of judgment when the secrets of all hearts shall be disclosed," he boomed, "that if either of you know any impediment why ye may not be lawfully joined together in matrimony, ye do now confess it." He paused, then asked the congregation, "If any man can show any just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace." The silence was absolute. Everyone was waiting for the "I will." This was my moment. I took a small breath. I did not turn to the vicar. I did not turn to Arthur. I turned, slowly, to face the congregation. A gasp rippled through the church. My voice, when it came out, was shaking, but it was clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I do," I said. "I know a reason." I let go of Arthur's hand and walked past him. He hissed my name, "Eleanor." A sound of pure shock and fury. I ignored him. I walked towards the front pew where his parents were sitting, his mother looking bewildered, his father, a stern, important-looking man, frowning in confusion. I opened the little prayer book, took out the folded paper, and held it out to Arthur's mother. "I believe this belongs to your son," I said, my voice gaining strength. "He seems to have made promises to many other women in many other towns. I think it's only fair that his other commitments are known before he makes new ones." Chaos, pure, unadulterated chaos erupted. Arthur's mother took the paper, her hand trembling. Arthur lunged for it, his charming face now a mask of raw fury. "What is this? Eleanor, you're hysterical," he shouted. But his father, whose face had gone deathly pale, was faster. He snatched the list from his wife's hand, as he read the names Isabel, Margaret, Sarah, and the corresponding sums of money. The color drained from his face. The whispers in the church turned to loud, shocked murmurs. I didn't stay to watch the full fallout. My part was done. I turned my back on the altar, on Arthur, on the life I had almost been tricked into. I walked back down the aisle, my head held high, my steps even and deliberate. The faces staring at me were no longer beaming. They were a blur of shock and confusion. I laid my beautiful, lying bouquet on an empty pew as I passed. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out of the dark church into the bright, cold air of the day. I was alone. My wedding was in ruins behind me. My reputation in the village was surely destroyed forever. I had no plan, no money to speak of, and nowhere to go. I had saved myself, but in doing so, I had lost everything. Suddenly, a hand touched my arm. I flinched, expecting it to be Arthur, or my father. But it wasn't. It was Clara. She was standing there, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were full of a fierce, protective light. She didn't say a word. She just took off the warm wool coat she was wearing and wrapped it around my shoulders, over the delicate lace of my now useless wedding dress. The gesture, so simple, so kind, broke the dam of my composure. I collapsed into her arms and sobbed, great, heaving sobs of terror and relief and a grief so profound I thought it might tear me in. She just held me, her arms a strong, safe harbor in the wreckage of my life. "You were right," I managed to whisper against her shoulder. "You were right about everything. I'm so sorry, Clara. I was so awful to you." She murmured, stroking my hair. "It doesn't matter now. None of it matters. What matters is that you're safe. You were so brave, Elle, the bravest person I've ever seen." Her words were a balm, healing a wound I hadn't even realized was still bleeding. Our friendship wasn't shattered after all. It had just been tested by fire, and here we were, on the other side, stronger than ever. The fallout in the village was exactly as I had feared. It was a scandal of epic proportions. The story of the wedding that wasn't, of the bride who exposed the groom at the altar, spread like wildfire. Arthur and his family were gone by nightfall, vanished as quickly as they had arrived. But the whispers remained, and they were all about me. I was the talk of the town, a spectacle. Some saw me as a tragic heroine, but many more saw me as a troublemaker, a girl who had brought shame and drama to our quiet community. Doors that had always been open to me were now politely but firmly closed. Old friends of my mother would cross the street to avoid having to speak to her. My parents, bless them, were caught between their own deep-seated horror of public shame and their love for me. They stood by me, but our home was thick with a heavy, unspoken tension. It became clear I couldn't stay. There were too many ghosts, too many pointing fingers. I had to leave. Clara, my steadfast, wonderful Clara, helped me pack a small suitcase with my most essential things. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. Her presence was enough. A week after my disastrous wedding day, Clara and my father took me to the train station. My mother couldn't bear to come. She just hugged me at the door, pressing a small envelope of money into my hand, her face wet with tears. I had £17 and a one-way ticket to London. As I stood on the platform, waiting for the train that would carry me away from everything I had ever known, I was terrified. The city was a vast, unknown entity, and I was just a girl from a small village with a ruined reputation. But I wasn't just that girl anymore. I was also the girl who had found the courage to speak the truth in a silent church. Life in London was hard, incredibly hard. I found a tiny, drafty room in a boarding house run by a formidable landlady who did not approve of girls with stories like mine. I got a job as a seamstress in a grim, noisy workshop in the East End, my fingers raw and my back aching from hunching over a sewing machine for 10 hours a day. The vibrant, colorful life Arthur had promised me was a world away from this gray, lonely existence. There were days when despair was a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. I missed the green fields, I missed my parents, and more than anything, I missed the simple, uncomplicated friendship I'd once shared with Clara. My only lifeline was our letters. Every week, I would write to her, telling her about the city, the work, the strange feeling of being invisible in a crowd of millions, and every week, she would write back, telling me the news from home, small snippets of village life that made me feel connected, remembered. Her letters were full of encouragement and love, and they were the fuel that kept me going. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a new life for myself. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, full of romance and travel. It was a small, quiet, simple life, but it was mine. I had built it with my own 2 hands. I found joy not in grand gestures, but in tiny victories, learning the complex London bus routes, affording a new book from a second-hand shop, a shared cup of tea with another girl at the workshop. I discovered a strength in myself I never knew I had. I learned that my value was not determined by a man's love or my marital status. I learned that I had not been ruined. I had been saved, and the person who had saved me was myself. Years passed. The sharp edges of the memory began to soften. My life in London took on a comfortable rhythm. I was promoted to supervisor at the workshop. I moved into a slightly bigger, brighter room. I was content, not ecstatic, not floating on air, but a deep, sturdy kind of content. Then one Tuesday morning, a letter arrived from my mother. Tucked inside with her usual news was a small, folded newspaper clipping from the county paper. My hands trembled as I opened it. The headline read, "Charlatan conman jailed for fraud." My eyes scanned the article. It was about Arthur, or Anthony, or Andrew. The newspaper ink was slightly smudged, but the words were crystal clear. The article detailed how Arthur, whose real name turned out to be Alistair Finch, had finally been caught. My act in the church had been the first thread that, when pulled, caused his entire web of deceit to unravel. After his father had read my list, he had turned his own son in to the police. It turned out Arthur's parents were not wealthy socialites, but a respectable, middle-class couple who had been bankrolling their son's lavish deceptions for years, always believing his stories of bad luck and misunderstandings. My list, with its concrete names and towns, was the proof they could no longer ignore. The police investigation that followed uncovered a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts stretching across 5 counties. The girl from Oak Haven, Isabel, had come forward. So had Margaret and Sarah and half a dozen others. My name was mentioned in the article. A brave young bride-to-be from our own county, whose courage at the altar brought Finch's crimes to light. Reading that, a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying lifted from my shoulders. For years, I had carried the shame of the scandal, the feeling that I was the one who had caused the trouble, but I hadn't been the troublemaker. I had been the truth-teller. My choice had not just saved me, it had saved others from the same fate. A quiet, profound sense of justice settled over me, peaceful and calm. The article also mentioned that Alistair's father had spent the last few years personally visiting every family his son had wronged, using his own savings to repay as much of the stolen money as he could. He was trying to make amends. Reading that, I felt a pang of something, not for the monster his son was, but for the decent parents caught in the devastating wake of his choices. And in that moment, I understood forgiveness. Not for Alistair. I don't think I could ever forgive his cruelty, but forgiveness as a way of letting go of the bitterness for my own sake. I let go of the anger I held towards his parents for their blindness, and I let go of the last vestiges of shame I held for myself. I was finally, truly free of him. Life, you know, has a funny way of surprising you. My grand, passionate love story had been a disaster, but a few years later, love found me again. It didn't arrive with a whirlwind of promises and stolen roses. It arrived quietly, in the hushed aisles of a local library. His name was George. He was a librarian, a kind, gentle man with glasses that were always slightly askew and a laugh that was soft and warm. He recommended a book to me one rainy afternoon. We started talking. Our love story wasn't a firework display. It was the slow, steady growth of a great oak tree. It was built on a foundation of shared books, long walks, quiet conversations, and a deep, abiding respect for one another. It was real. We married in a small, simple ceremony at the registry office. Clara was my witness, my maid of honor, her face beaming with genuine, unadulterated joy this time. We bought a little house, this very house. We filled it with books, and soon, with the laughter of our own children, and eventually, the laughter of our grandchildren. George, my dear sweet George, passed away 5 years ago. I miss him every single day, but the life we built together, the love we shared, that's a warmth that still fills this house. The camera slowly zooms in on Nan's face. She is back in her kitchen, the afternoon light soft and warm. She picks up the old, pressed rose from the table, holding it delicately in her wrinkled fingers. The grandfather clock ticks softly in the background. You see, my dear, this old rose ... It looked so perfect on the outside, didn't it? So beautiful. But its beauty was a trap. It represented a love that was all surface, all performance, with no roots to hold it firm. What I learned, the hard way, is that the greatest love stories aren't always the most passionate, dramatic ones that sweep you off your feet. Sometimes, the truest, most profound love is the one you show to yourself. It's the courage to listen to that tiny, niggling voice of doubt, even when the whole world is telling you not to. It's the strength to walk away from a beautiful, glittering lie, even if it means stepping into a difficult, uncertain truth. My life wasn't saved by a handsome man or a grand romantic gesture. My life was saved in that cold church, with a trembling voice and a piece of paper hidden in a prayer book. It was saved by a choice to honor my own intuition over a charming smile. So if I can leave you with one little piece of wisdom from these many years, it's this: trust that little voice inside you, dear. It is the most faithful friend you will ever have. It doesn't always shout. Most of the time, it just whispers. But listen to it, nurture it. It may not always tell you what you want to hear, but I promise you this: it will always, always lead you home, to yourself.